All right, everybody. So I want to talk today with you about who really rigged the 2020 election. I know there's been a lot of talk about voter fraud and voter irregularities, but there is one sure truth. The media rigged the 2020 elections. Tim Grosclose is a professor of political science over at UCLA, and he's written about media bias. And he wrote years and years and years ago that media bias, liberal media bias in the United States was worth about 8 to 10 points for Democrats in any given election. His suggestion was that if all the media outlets in 2008 had shifted, even as far left as the New York Times, then Barack Obama would not have won 52-46 over John McCain. He would have won 61-38 over John McCain. Right? The idea being that as the media shift left, they shift perceptions in how people think. Okay, the last 4 years have been a nonstop, wild ride of media malpractice, shifting wildly to the left, lying to you. And that shifted Americans' opinions. It certainly was enough to shift hundreds of thousands, millions of votes across the country. The media lied to you for 4 years. They abandoned their supposed objectivity. They did so in pursuit of Orange Man Bad. They may have undercut their own institutional ability to survive if Orange Man Bad is indeed deemed to have lost the election. But here's the bottom line. This election was not fair. It was not fair specifically because the media have formed a triumvirate along with their friends in the Democratic Party and in social media to suppress information they don't want you to see and to push narratives that are simply untrue. So I want to go through some of those with you today because it really is true that were the media less biased, were the media even close to the objective observer of facts that they pretend that they are, Donald Trump would have won this election going away, not just because the economy was booming up until COVID, but because all of the narratives that the media focused on were overtly false. Okay, so first, we got to talk a little bit about how the system works. Okay, so you have, as I say, this triumvirate. You have the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party formulates the message. The message is always that Republicans are responsible for everything. Now, in that way, they're no different than the Republican Party would be on the other side, right? The Democrats are responsible for everything. The difference is the Democratic Party has in its pocket the mainstream media. 93% by last polling data, 93% of people in newsrooms say they vote Democrat. You cannot find a single Trump supporter anywhere at the New York Times. They do not exist. You can't find a single Trump voter anywhere on the air at CNN, unless they're being paid as sort of the straw man to beat up. They just don't exist. The editorial hierarchy and most of our establishment media institutions, they don't include anybody who is to the right of Hillary Clinton. Just does not exist. Well, what that means is that they just repeat all the Democratic talking points. And then the Democratic Party and the media combine to pressure the one arena in American life where there's supposed to be free and open dissemination of information. Typically, conservatives have fought back against liberal media dominance by building their own institutions, right? We built Daily Wire here, right? We built the Ben Shapiro Show. Daily Caller exists. Breitbart exists. Blaze TV exists. Fox News exists. And all of these exist in an arena, particularly online, of free distribution of information. And social media made that possible, right? Facebook made that possible and Twitter made that possible. So Democrats and the media fought back. And the way they fought back is by working with woke staffers inside these big tech companies in order to suppress messages they don't like and to suppress outlets they don't like. And so there is this game where members of the media basically start suggesting, along with members of the Democratic Party, that even the free and open dissemination of information on social media is, in fact, Russian disinformation. It's promulgating lies to the American public. And so they hijack these supposed platforms, and then they turn the platforms into distribution mechanisms only for their own narratives and only for their own messages. And they shut down and suppress all of the other messages and narratives and facts presented by the other side, even if those facts are true. So this week, we saw this just the most obvious example I've ever seen in my entire life. Kevin Roose, who is a tech activist at the New York Times. He's not a journalist, he's an activist. Okay, every day, he tweets out a list of various articles that are performing well on Facebook. This is designed specifically in order to pressure Facebook to shut down those articles, because what he will say is, why, look at that. Ben Shapiro's page is performing really well. Why, look at that. Dan Bongino's page is performing really well. Why, oh my goodness, Daily Wire is getting heavy traffic via Facebook. That's because Facebook is committed to disinformation. So he put out a tweet, and here is the tweet. Facebook is absolutely teeming with right-wing misinformation right now. These are all among the 10 most engaged URLs on the platform over the last 24 hours. Okay, then he proceeded to present 4 headlines. Every single one of the headlines is true. One was from Daily Wire, 2 were from Breitbart, and 1 was from Bongino.com. Every single one of those headlines was factually true. 2 of those headlines were actually reported in similar terms by the New York Times itself, the publication he works for. So when he was called on this, that this isn't misinformation, here is how Kevin Roose responded. He said, quote, for the conservatives who are mad about this, yes, it is possible for a story to be factually accurate and for it to be part of a misinformation campaign aimed at undermining confidence in an election. So in other words, it's not that he is targeting false stories that are misinformation. He is targeting stories that are true, but do not back a narrative that he likes. And this is the game. This is the game. And social media buys into it because social media is staffed by Silicon Valley liberals and woke staffers. And they are eager to jump into that iron triangle, Democratic Party, media, social media. They are eager to jump in on the formation of that iron triangle. And this is why you had in the run-up to the election, social media censoring and suppressing all information related to, for example, Hunter Biden. Right? That story was suppressed by Twitter. Jack Dorsey himself acknowledged to Congress that the New York Post story was not misinformation. They had no information that it was misinformation. Here's Jack Dorsey saying exactly that.
Do any of you have any information whatsoever they're not authentic or that they are Russian disinformation? Mr. Dorsey.
We don't.
You know, so why would you censor it? Why did you prevent that from being disseminated on your platform that is supposed to be for the free expression of ideas, and particularly true ideas?
We believed it fell afoul of our hacking materials policy.
Facebook suppressed the story preemptively, saying that it had yet to be fact-checked. Okay, well, every story that is distributed on Facebook virtually has yet to be fact-checked when it's originally posted. But that's the standard. If it doesn't agree with the narrative, social media will now suppress that. So that is the iron triangle by which information is suppressed. That is worth points in polls. It is worth points in voting booths to Democrats. And you see that this iron triangle between the Democrats and the media and social media to suppress narratives and to promulgate particularly false narratives, this has had a long shelf life over the past few years. Overtly false narratives have been pushed for years. The most obvious false narrative was the Russian collusion narrative. We heard for years Donald Trump was a cat's paw of Vladimir Putin. He's in Putin's pocket. He's some sort of traitor. Here are a bevy of media outlets saying just that.
Breaking news, President Trump off the rails.
It was the beginning of the end today.
The beginning of the end.
Breaking news tonight, new bombshell.
This is the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
The walls are closing in.
The walls closing in.
The wall's closing in.
It's over.
The wall's closing in.
The wall's closing in.
This is going to be the Achilles heel.
Breaking news tonight. I expect Trump to depart. This week will be the watershed week. Trump is in big trouble.
Trump's in a lot of trouble.
It's a sign of a terrified old man who feels the
walls
closing in.
The walls
are increasingly
closing in on him.
Tonight, the walls
are closing in.
Today changed everything. This is the beginning of the end.
That idea that Trump is a threat to American democracy because of Russian collusion, that never materialized. Didn't matter. The media went for it all the way. And then they simply shifted. You'll remember that the editor of the New York Times, Dean Baquet, the publisher of the New York Times, he actually came out and he said, after the Russian collusion thing fell apart, he said, I think we're going to restaff all of our people to focus in on racism. And just like that, the narrative turned. And suddenly, the focus went from Donald Trump works for Vladimir Putin to Donald Trump is a white supremacist. And magically, that became the narrative. Members of the media just started repeating that Donald Trump is a white supremacist.
Of course he doesn't denounce white supremacy, Sonny, because he is a white supremacist. Americans have to decide whether they want a white supremacist in the White House. We've never had it before. Maybe we didn't know we had it, but we certainly know we have it now.
Yeah. Okay, and then they decided not only to lie about Donald Trump being a white supremacist. I mean, for example, John Roberts at Fox had this exchange with Kayleigh McEnany in which she literally explained, she reads him a list of quotes in which Donald Trump says he is not a white supremacist and hates white supremacy. And John Roberts of Fox is like, what if I don't believe you? Well, who cares? You're wrong.
As the person who speaks for the president, does the president denounce white supremacism and groups that espouse it in all their forms?
This has been answered yesterday by the president himself, the day before by the president himself on the debate stage. The president was asked this. He said, sure, 3 times. Yesterday, he was point blank asked, do you denounce white supremacy? And he said, I've always denounced any form of that. I can go back and read for you in August 2019, in one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. In August of 2017, racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups. I have an entire list of these quotes that I can go through with you. He has condemned white supremacy more than any president in modern history.
Just to clear it up this morning, can you, naming it, make a declarative statement that you denounce, that the president denounces it?
I just did.
But again, the narrative, above all, the media are worth points to the Democrats. A few weeks ago, the Democratic narrative, pushed by the media and pushed by social media, is that voter suppression was on the horizon, that Donald Trump was going to steal the election via screwing around with the votes. Now when Donald Trump questions voter fraud and voter irregularity, he's the bad guy. But when it was Democrats pushing the idea that voter irregularities were commonplace, it was considered a narrative worth hearing about. Donald Trump was overtly a threat to democracy. This was a message pushed by the Democratic Party, laundered through the media, and then pushed into social media at exorbitant rates. For example, here's Barack Obama saying that Donald Trump is trying to discourage people from voting.
What we've seen in a way that is unique to modern political history is a president who's explicit in trying to discourage people from voting. What we've never seen before is a president say, I'm going to try to actively kneecap the Postal Service to encourage voting, and I will be explicit about the reason I'm doing it.
Yeah.
That's sort of unheard of.
It was also AOC saying that Donald Trump was attacking the post office, that he was going to go out and burn the mailboxes.
The Postal Service is not only how we send a ballot, it is how we get our medicine. It is how we send rent checks. It's where people are getting their tax refunds. It is a core service of any civilized society. And an attack on our Postal Service and an attempt to dismantle our Postal Service out of a selfish desire to sabotage our democracy and maintain a grip on power is an attack on all of us.
This crap was pushed by the media. You had Rachel Maddow almost literally crying about the Postal Service.
It's how we get our letters. It's how we get our ballots now because of the COVID crisis. It's the freaking fracking mail. We need it. But this is a fight against a thing that Americans actually and quite broadly love and respect and don't want to go away. This is the kind of fight that most Americans have a side they want to be on. And it is not the side that is stealing the mailboxes and telling us that, I don't think it's going to work out for you to get your ballot in on time.
Now, all of that was just a lie. It just wasn't true. But didn't matter. It was pushed out anyway. So for 4 long years, all we heard was Donald Trump is a white supremacist. Donald Trump is a Russian colluder. Donald Trump is trying to undermine American democracy and destroy the republic from the inside. And then finally, we had the media pushing all these polls that ended up being pretty much complete garbage. So, bad on me. I reported the polls because I assumed wrongly that pollsters had attempted to correct their mistakes. Apparently, they not only didn't correct their mistakes, they blew it even worse than they did the last time. By the way, one of the reasons the pollsters blew it is because the pollsters didn't detect a shy Trump effect. What was the shy Trump effect? It was members of the general American public who would not tell pollsters they were voting for Trump and would not tell their friends they were voting for Trump. You know why they wouldn't tell their friends they were voting for Trump? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with that iron triangle. Democrats would push a message like Donald Trump was evil. The media would pick up that message. That message would get pushed around on social media, and then you wouldn't want to tell any of your friends because you were afraid you would get canceled. You were afraid your boss would fire you, and so you didn't tell the pollsters. So you had the media pushing these polls about how Trump was getting blown out in Wisconsin. It was narrow. How he was getting blown out in Michigan. It was narrow. He was getting blown out in Pennsylvania. It was narrow. You had all of these polls being pushed, and the polls turned out not to be right. The media were not worth 8 to 10 points for Joe Biden in this election. They were worth all the points for Joe Biden in this election. Joe Biden literally sat in his basement and did nothing. And the media asked him about what flavor of ice cream he was eating. They accused Donald Trump, meanwhile, of killing 200,000 people. Joe Biden laid out this message. Here is Joe Biden laying out the message.
220,000 Americans dead. If you hear nothing else I say tonight, hear this. Anyone who's responsible for not taking control, in fact, not saying I take no responsibility initially, anyone who's responsible for that many deaths should not remain as president of the United States of America.
And then, of course, you had Breonna Keeler of CNN basically laying out that message, too, just right in unison.
There are 220,417 reasons to talk about coronavirus. There are nearly 60,000 cases per day in the U.S. and rising. The person whose response has failed on most objective measures is not fixing his government's approach to the crisis. Instead, he's suggesting we just ignore it. The president doesn't even regularly acknowledge the huge loss of life that we've experienced here in the last 9 months. In fact, he has instead questioned whether that horrifying number is accurate. 220,000 dead.
Meanwhile, if you questioned the policies of Andrew Cuomo, if you questioned lockdown policy, if you questioned actually the differential rates of COVID deadliness via population tranche, you were at risk of being censored by YouTube. You're at risk of being censored by Facebook and Twitter. Okay, this is the game. This is the game. And this is going to be the game for the foreseeable future. The media were worth the margin of the election to Joe Biden many times over here. Moving forward, the media have completely undercut their credibility in pursuit of Trump. So what are we going to do about it? We got to build an alternative media. We have to build a replacement for the media. The media do not deserve your trust. They do not deserve your dollars. We're trying to do that over here at Daily Wire. This is why you should come subscribe over at Daily Wire. But you shouldn't just subscribe at Daily Wire. You should go subscribe to our friends at Blaze TV. You should give a donation at PragerU. You should support alternative sources of information because the media cannot be trusted not to twist elections. They cannot be trusted not to lie to you and suppress information and declare themselves the defenders of democracy in doing so.